After 5 silent years on a secret Navy SEAL mission, Brennan finally came home. But his father was gone, his house was taken, and his old mother was standing in the snow with only a suitcase. Beside her sat Bishop, the German shepherd Brennan had raised as a puppy to protect his parents. The dog had kept his promise, guarding her through threats, loneliness, and nights. No one came to help. Then Bishop led Brennan to the hidden clues his father left behind before he died. One broken family's pain became the truth that saved an entire town of elderly neighbors from losing their homes. Tell us where you're watching from. Share what touched your heart. And please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. The taxi came down the northern road just after 10 at night, its headlights cutting 2 pale tunnels through the falling snow. Beyond the windshield, Brackenridge Falls lay quiet beneath winter's hand. The town had always seemed small to Brennan Cole, even when he was a boy. A few sloped streets, a white church with a steeple that caught the sunrise, a grocery store with a bell over the door, and the dark blue lake beyond the pines. In summer, that lake glittered like a promise. In winter, it froze over so cleanly that the old men used to say you could hear God walking across it if the wind stopped long enough. Brennan sat in the back seat with a canvas military bag beside his boots, and both hands resting on his knees. He was 35, tall and lean, with the hard, spare build of a man shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. His face was clean, shaven square at the jaw, with sharp cheekbones and gray, blue eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, slightly longer than regulation now, though not by much. He wore a worn olive, gray tactical shirt beneath a dark jacket, old combat pants faded at the knees, weathered boots, and a battered military watch. He had kept through deserts, ships, safe houses, and 5 years of silence. 5 years the number sat inside him like a stone. For 5 years, Brennan had served on a classified joint operation that swallowed names, maps, and messages. No personal calls, no casual letters, no photographs sent home from foreign streets. His parents had been told only that he was serving overseas in restricted conditions, and that emergency contact had to pass through official military channels. That was the clean version, the version written by people who had never watched an old mother wait by a kitchen phone. In Brennan's memory, home still had light in the windows. His father, Harold Cole, would be on the porch in a flannel shirt, one shoulder leaning against the post he had replaced himself 20 years earlier. Harold had been a broad, weathered man with carpenter's hands, a white beard trimmed close, and the patient eyes of someone who had fixed more broken things than he had ever owned. He laughed slowly, but when he laughed, the house seemed to remember it. His mother, Eleanor, would be in the kitchen, small, soft, spoken Eleanor Cole, with silver, brown hair pinned low at the back of her head, pale skin worn thin by cold winters and long years of worrying, and eyes that could forgive a man before he knew what he had done wrong. She used to leave the porch light on even when Brennan was only a few minutes late. And Bishop had been a pup the last time. Brennan saw him, all oversized paws, uncertain ears, and stubborn courage, a German shepherd with a black and tan coat, a dark saddle, and eyes too serious for a creature that young Brennan had found him at a rescue shelter during his last short leave. The dog had been small enough to fit against his chest. But when a stranger reached too suddenly toward Eleanor, Bishop had stepped in front of her and growled with the voice of a toy thundercloud. Harold had laughed until he coughed. "That little fellow thinks he's guarding Fort Knox," he had said. Brennan had taken the pup home that afternoon. He had trained him as much as time allowed, not like a military working dog. There had not been enough days for that, but enough for simple things. Do not eat from strangers' bark. If someone comes to the door after dark, find Eleanor. If Harold coughs too hard, stay between the old folks in trouble. Remember this scent. Remember this hand. Remember this family. On the last morning, Brennan had knelt in the yard, pressed his forehead lightly against Bishop's, and whispered, "Take care of them for me." The pup had placed one paw on his wrist. Brennan had carried that touch through 5 years of places he was not allowed to name. The taxi driver cleared his throat. He was an older man named Earl Fitch, thin as a fence rail with a tobacco, rough voice, a red nose from the cold, and a gray knit cap pulled low over ears that stuck out a little. He had picked Brennan up from the small regional bus station without asking many questions, which Brennan appreciated. Earl drove with both hands high on the wheel and kept glancing at the rearview mirror, as if deciding whether silence was kinder than truth. "You said Cole Place, right?" Earl asked. Brennan looked up. "That's right." Earl's fingers tightened on the wheel. "Harold Cole's old place?" "My father's place." The driver went quiet. Snow tapped against the glass. The heater rattled. On the dashboard, a plastic St. Christopher medal swung softly back and forth, like a tiny pendulum measuring the years Brennan had lost. Finally, Earl said, "I thought nobody was allowed up there anymore." Brennan's eyes shifted to the mirror. "What does that mean?" Earl swallowed. "Maybe I shouldn't be the one saying." "Say it." The old driver kept his gaze on the road. "There's a claim posted. Company out of Duluth, or maybe Minneapolis. I don't know. North Star Haven Development. Been buying up land all around the lake. Some folks sold. Some folks got pushed. Your folks." He stopped himself, jaw working beneath the gray stubble on his chin. Brennan leaned forward slightly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "My folks what?" Earl looked smaller behind the wheel. "I just drive the cab, son." The word "son" landed badly. Brennan sat back, and something cold moved through his chest. On missions, he had learned the weight of missing information. The piece not said, the door not opened, the eye that looked away too quickly. Earl Fitch was not lying. Brackenridge Falls appeared through the snow, not as Brennan remembered it, but as a town holding its breath. The white church stood at the corner, its steeple half hidden by darkness. The grocery store sign glowed weakly. A wreath still hung on the post office door, though Christmas had passed weeks ago. A banner stretched across Main Street, flapping in the wind. "Welcome, North Star Haven. A new future by the Lake." Brennan stared at the words until the cab passed beneath them. The road climbed toward the old Cole property. The pines grew thicker. His father had planted some of those trees when Brennan was young enough to believe trees grew fast if you asked them politely. The house sat beyond a split, rail fence, at the end of a short lane where snow used to pile deep enough for sledding. Brennan remembered falling there at 8 years old and crying until Harold scooped him up with sawdust on his sleeves and said, "A Cole can fall, boy. Just don't build a house down there." The taxi slowed, then stopped. For a moment, Brennan did not move. The house was dark. Not sleeping dark, abandoned dark. Boards crossed the lower windows. A corner of the porch sagged beneath the snow. The old porch swing was gone. The front steps had not been shoveled. A red sign hung from the fence, bright and ugly against the white. Property claimed by North Star Haven Development. No trespassing, private acquisition in process. Then again, his ears filled with the low rush of blood. His hands remained still on his knees, but everything inside him had gone alert. Combat alert. Mission alert. The ancient human alarm that rises when a man sees his childhood home wearing another man's name. "Mr. Cole," Earl said softly, "there's someone over there." Brennan turned. At first, he saw only the streetlight, yellow and weak, burning at the bend in the road. Beneath it stood a figure wrapped in an old winter coat. Small, bent, motionless, his mother. Eleanor Cole stood in the snow, as if she had been placed there by grief itself. She was 71 now, though the years seemed to have taken more than 5 from her. Her face was thinner, her cheeks hollowed by worry, her mouth trembling in the cold wisps of silver hair had escaped from under a faded wool hat. Her coat, once brown, had gone gray at the seams. Threads hung from one cuff. Snow gathered on her shoulders and did not melt. Both her hands clutched a framed photograph against her chest. Even before Brennan saw the face in the frame, he knew Harold. His father smiled from behind the glass, caught forever in a better season, wearing the blue flannel shirt he had loved, the one with the burned mark near the cuff from a stove repair. The photograph was old enough that Harold still looked strong, alive enough that for one terrible second Brennan's mind refused what his eyes were already telling him. At Eleanor's feet sat an old leather suitcase, the same one the family had taken on summer drives when Brennan was a boy. One corner was split. A strip of cloth had been tied around the handle to keep it closed. Beside the suitcase sat a German shepherd. Bishop. He was no longer the awkward pup Brennan had left behind. He was large now, perhaps 75 pounds, broad, chested and steady, his black and tan coat thick against the cold, his dark saddle dusted with snow. His ears stood high, scarred slightly along one edge. His amber, brown eyes were fixed on the taxi, not wild, not friendly, but measuring. His body was positioned between Eleanor and the road, exactly where Brennan had once taught him to stand. A guardian, a promise with teeth. Brennan opened the taxi door. The cold struck his face. For one instant he could not step out. His body had crossed oceans, borders, deserts, and war rooms. But the 10 feet between the cab and his mother seemed impossible. Then Eleanor lifted her head. Her eyes found him. No cry came from her at first. She only tightened her arms around Harold's portrait, as if afraid that seeing one man returned might make the other disappear again. Brennan stepped into the snow. "Mom?" The word left him smaller than he expected. Eleanor's face broke. Her lips parted. A sound came out, not quite his name, not quite a sob. It was the sound of a woman who had rehearsed a reunion in her mind for 5 winters, and then discovered that joy, when it finally arrived, could be just as heavy as sorrow. Bishop rose. The dog did not bark. He did not run. He moved slowly from Eleanor's side, head low, shoulders tense, every step careful. Brennan held still. He knew better than to reach first. Bishop had been left a puppy with a mission, and had grown into that mission without knowing whether the man who gave it would ever return. The dog reached Brennan and sniffed his hand, then his wrist, then the sleeve of his jacket. Brennan felt the warm breath through the fabric. He remembered the tiny paw on his wrist. He remembered saying, "Take care of them for me," as though a young dog could hold back time, sickness, greed, and human cruelty. Bishop lifted his head. For a second, his eyes changed. Recognition did not arrive like excitement. It arrived like dawn over a battlefield, slow and trembling, touching ruined ground with light. Bishop pressed his forehead against Brennan's chest and released a low, broken sound from deep in his throat. Brennan's hand came down on the dog's neck. The fur was thick, cold on top, warm underneath. "You stayed," he whispered. The words nearly undid him. Eleanor moved then, one step, another. The portrait of Harold shook in her hands. Brennan crossed the remaining distance and put his arms around his mother, careful not to crush the frame between them. She felt too light. That frightened him more than the boarded house, more than the sign on the fence, more than Earl Fitch watching from the taxi with sorrow in his old eyes. Eleanor pressed her face against his jacket. "My boy," she whispered, "my boy came home." Brennan closed his eyes. The smell of her wool coat, cold air, lavender soap, and old wood smoke came back to him so strongly that for a moment he was 10 years old again, scraped knees in muddy boots, standing in the kitchen while his mother pretended not to notice he had tracked dirt across the floor. Then she pulled back just enough to look at him. There was something she had to say. He saw it before she spoke. The fear, the apology, the wound she had been carrying alone. "Where's Dad?" Brennan asked, though Harold's portrait already answered. Eleanor's mouth trembled. Her fingers tightened around the frame until the knuckles went pale. "He waited," she said. "He waited as long as he could." The street seemed to tilt. Brennan did not fall. Men like him were trained not to fall when the body wanted to. His face barely changed, but inside something gave way with a sound only he could hear. Harold was dead. His father had died while Brennan was somewhere beyond maps, keeping secret. He had survived enemies with rifles and men with clean suits and dangerous smiles. He had come home carrying classified silence in his bones, and his father was a photograph in his mother's arms. Eleanor saw the guilt reach him. She shook her head at once. "No, don't you do that. Don't you put that on yourself." But Brennan could not speak. Bishop stepped closer, pressing against his leg, not jumping, not whining. Anchoring. The dog had learned the shape of grief long before Brennan returned to it. A gust of wind pushed snow across the road. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang once. Late and lonely. Then Bishop's body changed. It happened so quickly that Brennan felt it before he understood it. The dog's weight shifted forward. His ears snapped toward the house. His lips pulled tight. A growl rolled low through it, not a bark. A warning. Brennan turned. The house remained dark. The boards over the windows were crooked shadows. Snow blew across the porch. Nothing moved. Then, in the upstairs window, behind a gap in one of the boards, a thin beam of light flashed and vanished. A flashlight. Someone was inside the Cole house. Brennan's blood went cold in a familiar way. Not fear. Function. His grief did not leave, but it moved to the side, making room for the part of him that had kept him alive. His eyes scanned the structure. Front approach exposed, side yard deep snow, back door likely accessible through the woodshed. Unknown number inside, unknown weapons, mother present, civilian witness in taxi, property posted. Any rash movement could be turned against him. He took one step toward the gate. Eleanor grabbed his wrist. Her hand was so cold that he looked down at it. "Mom, please," her voice cracked. "They want that. They want you angry. They want you to break something. Then they'll say you came home dangerous." The words struck him strangely. They were not the words of a frightened woman guessing in the dark. They were the words of someone who had learned the enemy's habits by being hurt by them. Brennan looked back at the house. Who's inside? Eleanor's eyes filled, but she shook her head. "I don't know any more. Men from the company. Men who say they have papers. Men who come after dark because daylight still embarrasses them. Earl Fitch stepped out of the taxi, his thin coat pulled tight around him. He was scared, but decent enough not to drive away. "Mr. Cole," Earl said, "maybe we should get your mother someplace warm." Brennan nodded once. He forced himself to move slowly. Control was not mercy tonight. It was strategy. He guided Eleanor toward the cab. She resisted only when he tried to take Harold's portrait so she could climb in. "No," she said, almost sharply. Brennan stopped. Eleanor looked ashamed of the sharpness. But she did not let go. "I carried him out. I'll carry him until he's home again." Brennan swallowed. "All right." He helped her into the taxi, careful with her knees, careful with the frame, careful because she seemed made of paper and winter. Earl opened the back door wide and muttered that he would turn the heat all the way up. But Bishop did not follow. The German shepherd stood at the gate, staring at the fence line near the red North Star sign. Then he lowered his head and began to dig. "Bishop," Brennan called softly. The dog ignored him. Snow flew from his paw. He scraped at the frozen crust beneath the fence, whining under his breath. Not panic, urgency. Brennan went to him. "Easy," he said, crouching. Bishop stepped back, but only enough to let him see. Something pale and wet was trapped half under the ice at the base of the fence. Brennan worked his fingers into the snow and pulled it loose. A piece of paper, not printed, torn from something larger, soaked, frozen at the edges, the ink blurred but not gone. Brennan held it close, shielding it from the wind. The handwriting was Harold. He knew it before he read the words. His father had always written like he built furniture, firm lines, no decoration, every letter practical and steady. But these letters were not steady. They shook. They leaned. The words looked as if they had been written by a hand fighting pain. Brennan read the line, "Don't let your mother sign another." That was all. The rest had been torn away. For several seconds, Brennan did not breathe. Behind him, Eleanor made a small sound from inside the taxi. She had seen the paper. Or perhaps she had seen his face. Bishop stood beside Brennan, snow on his muzzle, eyes fixed on the dark house. The dog's growl returned, lower now, aimed not only at the stranger inside, but at the years themselves, at every hand that had knocked after midnight, every paper pushed across a table, every lie spoken softly to an old woman in a cold room. Brennan folded the wet scrap with careful fingers and placed it inside his jacket. He looked at the boarded windows, at the red sign, at the porch his father had built, at the place where a family had waited until waiting became mourning. 5 years of silence had brought him home. But home had not been silent. It had been calling, bleeding. And somewhere inside the house Harold Cole had built with his own hands, someone was still searching for whatever the dead man had tried to leave behind. Ruth Mayfield's grocery store sat 2 streets below Main, wedged between the old post office and a boarded barber shop that still had a striped pole out front, though it had not turned in years. The sign above Ruth's door was faded green, hand-painted by her late husband, back when Brackenridge Falls still believed every winter would be followed by a fair spring. Inside, the little store smelled of coffee, flour, wood polish, canned peaches, and the kind of warmth that came, not from the radiator alone, but from decades of people stepping inside with cold hands and leaving with something to carry home. Ruth herself came out from behind the counter before the bell over the door finished trembling. She was 66, short and sturdy, with soft round shoulders, silver curls pinned messily around her head, and hazel eyes that had seen enough sorrow to know when not to ask questions too quickly. Her skin was pale with a map of fine lines around her mouth, the kind made by both laughter and worry. She wore a thick burgundy sweater beneath a faded blue apron, and though her hands were flour-dusted, there was nothing fragile about the way she moved. Ruth Mayfield had the face of a woman who would offer soup first, judgment never, and truth only when the heart could survive it. "Oh, Eleanor," she breathed. Eleanor Cole stepped in with Harold's portrait held tight against her chest. The snow on her old coat began to melt in tiny, dark patches. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips nearly colorless from the cold, but she still tried to stand straight, as if dignity were the last shawl she owned. Brennan followed with the old suitcase in one hand. Bishop entered last. The German shepherd did not explore the store. He did not sniff shelves or greet Ruth with cheerful curiosity. He crossed the threshold, glanced once at the front window, once at the rear hallway, then positioned himself beside Eleanor's chair before she had even sat down. His black Ann tote glistened with melting snow. His amber, brown eyes remained watchful, and one scarred ear tilted toward every sound outside. 5 years had carved patience into him. Not softness, patience. Ruth took in the sight of Brennan and froze for half a second. "You look like your father did at 30, she said quietly, "only harder around the eyes." Brennan did not know how to answer that. He set the suitcase near the table. Ruth recovered herself and touched Eleanor's arm. "Sit down, honey. I'll put coffee on, and something hot. Nobody should be out in this weather with grief as their only coat." Eleanor gave a faint, broken smile. "Still talking like a church bulletin, Ruth. Still feeding people who won't admit they're hungry." The small humor should have warmed the room. It almost did. Brennan sat across from his mother at a round table near the back, where the store's public shelves ended and Ruth's private life began. There were old framed photographs on the wall, children in Halloween costumes, a fishing derby from 1989, a faded newspaper clipping about a flood, and one picture of Harold Cole repairing the store's front step, while Ruth's husband watched with a cup of coffee and a useless expression. Brennan looked at that photograph too long. His father was alive in it. Strong hands, laughing eyes, a pencil behind one ear. A man who could turn lumber into shelter and silence into comfort. Eleanor noticed where he was looking and lowered her gaze. Brennan had 100 questions. Why had no one told him sooner? When had Harold died? How had his mother ended up with a suitcase in the snow? Who had taken the house? Why had Bishop been waiting like a sentry beside her instead of sleeping in the kitchen where he belonged? But every question felt like a knife, and his mother already looked carved thin by too many blades. Ruth placed mugs of coffee on the table, then a bowl of chicken soup in front of Eleanor. "Eat first," she said. "Talking can wait long enough for warmth." Eleanor touched the spoon but did not lift it. Bishop rested his chin on her knee. Only then did she breathe as if she had been given permission. The suitcase sat between Brennan's boots. Its leather was cracked, its brass buckles dark with age. He remembered that suitcase. Harold used to tie it with rope when the latch failed, claiming the rope gave it character. Eleanor had packed it every summer with sandwiches, towels, and more socks than any child could reasonably need. Now it looked like all that remained of a life. Eleanor reached down and pulled it closer. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. There were not many clothes inside. A folded nightgown, 2 pairs of wool socks, Harold's old blue sweater, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, though one elbow had been patched twice. A small, empty pill bottle with the label scratched by years of handling. A handkerchief Brennan recognized as his own, white once, now yellowed at the edges, folded with the care of something sacred, and beneath it, a tiny leather collar. Brennan's breath caught. The collar was brown, worn soft, with a little brass buckle and teeth marks along one side. Bishop's puppy collar. The large dog lifted his head as if the old leather carried a sound only he could hear. Brennan reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the collar, time folded. 5 years earlier, Brackenridge Falls had been gold instead of white. Autumn had come late that year. The maples burned red along the lake road, and the pines stood dark behind them, like old soldiers watching a parade. Brennan had come home on short leave without being able to explain why the leave felt heavier than others. He knew only that the assignment ahead would be long, classified, and merciless to ordinary human ties. He had been 30 then, leaner in the face, still carrying the young man's foolish belief that he could divide himself cleanly, duty in one hand, family in the other. Harold saw through him before breakfast. His father stood at the stove, broad-backed white beard trimmed close, hair thinning but still stubborn around the temples. He wore flannel and suspenders and pretended not to wheeze when he bent to pull biscuits from the oven. "You're quiet," Harold said. "I'm always quiet." "No, you're Navy quiet. That's different. IET. No, you're Navy quiet. That's different. Navy quiet means you're leaving longer than you're allowed to say." She was 66 then, still small but fuller in the face, her silver brown hair tucked beneath a blue scarf. She moved with gentle purpose, pinning shirts to the line as if ordinary chores could keep dread from entering the yard. "I can't talk about it," Brennan said. Harold nodded. "Figured. That doesn't mean I don't want to." "Figured that too." That was Harold, a man of few questions and fewer complaints, the kind of father who could read pain in the way a son held his coffee cup. 2 days later, Eleanor asked Brennan to drive her to the animal rescue outside town. She claimed Ruth needed help choosing blankets to donate. But when they arrived, Brennan understood the trap at once. The rescue was a low white building with kennels behind it and a smell of bleach, hay, wet fur, and desperate hope. A woman named June Atwater ran the place. June was in her late 50s, tall and narrow with weather, browned skin, long gray hair in a braid, and the direct gaze of someone who loved animals because people had disappointed her often. She wore rubber boots, a quilted vest, and no patience for excuses. "Your mother says you grew up with dogs," June said. "My mother says a lot when she's plotting." Eleanor looked innocent. "I only said you had room in your heart. You said nothing about my house? Your father already said yes." Brennan turned. Harold, who had apparently followed in his old pickup, stood by the kennel gate with both hands in his coat pockets and a suspiciously cheerful expression. Then the puppy appeared. He was thin, all legs and ears, that could not decide whether to stand or fold. His coat was black and tan, the dark saddle just beginning to show. His paws were too large for his body, his muzzle too serious for his age. He did not bounce like the other puppies. He watched. June opened the gate. "German Shepherd mix, though I'd bet heavy on Shepherd. Maybe 10 or 11 weeks, found near the state road. No one claimed him." The puppy stepped out cautiously. Eleanor crouched. "Hello, sweetheart." The puppy sniffed her sleeve, then pressed his nose into her palm. Brennan felt something in his chest shift against his will. A delivery man came through the back gate carrying a crate of supply. He was a big fellow, loud-footed, harmless but careless. As he passed too close behind Eleanor, the puppy spun around, planted himself between her and the man, and released a growl so small and determined that Harold laughed hard enough to cough. The cough lasted too long. Brennan looked at him sharply. Harold waved him off. Coffee went down wrong. There was no coffee in his hand. The puppy kept standing guard in front of Eleanor. Harold wiped his eyes, still smiling. That little fellow thinks he's guarding Fort Knox. He belongs with us. Brennan knelt and held out his hand. The puppy sniffed his wrist. For one strange second, Brennan felt judged by a creature small enough to carry under one arm. "What's his name?" Eleanor asked. Brennan looked at the pup's solemn face. "Bishop." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Like chess. Like the piece that moves at an angle and shows up where nobody expects. That sounds like a dog who'll outsmart me. He probably will." Bishop went home with them before sundown. The days that followed became the kind of memory Brennan would later take out in the dark, not to comfort himself, but to remember what comfort had once felt like. He trained Bishop in the yard behind the house, not with the intensity of military work, but with repetition, gentleness, and purpose. He placed a treat in his hand, then had a stranger offer food from another. Bishop learned to refuse the stranger. He taught the pup to bark when someone knocked after dark. He taught him to run to Eleanor when Harold coughed hard in the kitchen. He gave him Brennan's handkerchief and let him learn the scent until Bishop could find it under a pile of leaves. Harold watched from the porch, pretending to carve a piece of cedar while actually studying every movement. "You're teaching that dog like you're leaving him an inheritance?" Harold said one evening. Brennan clipped the little collar around Bishop's neck. "Maybe I am." The humor left Harold's face. Bishop, sensing the change, trotted to Harold and put both paws on his boot. Harold bent with a grimace. He tried to hide and scratched the pup behind the ears. "All right, then. If you're inheriting this place, first lesson, your grandmother sneaks biscuits to dogs when she thinks nobody sees. Do not let her deny it." "I heard that," Eleanor called from the kitchen window. "I meant for you too." The house had laughed then, not just the people inside it. The house itself, Brennan thought now. The boards, the porch, the windows, the kitchen table with knife marks from old meals. Everything had seemed alive. On Brennan's last morning, frost silvered the grass. His bag was packed. The official car would meet him at the bus station, and after that, his life would narrow into instructions, silence, and names that would not appear on paper. Eleanor folded his jacket collar, though it did not need folding. "You'll write if you can, if I can, and if you can't?" He could not lie to her. "Not fully. Then I'll come home when it's done." Harold held out his hand. His grip was strong, but Brennan felt the tremor underneath. "Do your job," Harold said. "I will. And don't spend 5 years thinking your old man can't fix a leaking roof without supervision." Brennan tried to smile. "It better not be 5 years." Harold's eyes softened. "Long as it takes, son." Bishop understood departure without understanding nations, secrecy, or duty. He grabbed Brennan's pant leg in his teeth and pulled backward, stubborn as a mule, his puppy paws sliding on the porch boards. Eleanor turned away quickly. Brennan knelt and cupped Bishop's young face in both hands. "I need you to listen," he whispered. "No chasing cars. No eating from strangers. If Mom falls, you get Ruth. If Dad coughs hard, you bark until someone comes. You stay close, you protect them." Bishop stared at him with "Take care of them for me." The little dog lifted one paw and set it on Brennan's wrist. It was not magic. It was not a miracle with thunder and trumpets. It was just a puppy touching a man's arm on a cold morning. Yet Eleanor made a small sound behind him, and Harold looked toward the lake as if the wind had put something in his eyes. Brennan left. The first year passed for the Cole house in pieces. Some postcards came through official channels, stiff and delayed, with sentences that said little. Brennan was safe. Brennan was serving. Brennan could not provide details. Eleanor read every word until the paper softened at the folds. Harold kept Bishop's train every morning. He hid Brennan's handkerchief somewhere new. Under the porch step in the woodpile, behind the old coffee tin in the shed. Bishop found it every time. Every night, Harold walked the property line with him, slower each month, one hand on the dog's back when his lungs tightened. Bishop grew fast. His ears stood, his chest widened, his bark deepened. By winter, no stranger crossed the yard without being measured by him. Then Harold's cough changed. At first, he called it age, then wood dust, then stubborn lungs. Eleanor wanted the doctor. Harold said next week. Next week became another week, and men like Harold were often most foolish when trying not to worry the people they loved. When the doctor finally came, he was a soft-spoken man from the next town named Dr. Peter Hallowell. He was in his early 60s, with thinning, sandy, gray hair, wire glasses, and a careful bedside manner that made bad news sound gentler, but not smaller. He listened to Harold's chest for a long time, then asked Eleanor to step into the kitchen. Harold did not need to hear the words to understand them. That night, Eleanor took out the emergency contact packet Brennan had left. Her hand shook over the official number. Harold, sitting in his chair beneath the lamp, saw it. "No," he said. "Harold, no, Ellie. He's our son, and he's where he has to be. He would come. I know he would. That's why you mustn't ask." Eleanor cried then, not loudly, but with the kind of grief that tries to stay polite. Harold reached for her hand. "I don't need him to watch me get smaller. He deserves to know. He deserves to finish what he was sent to do without carrying my death before it happens." The words hung between them. Bishop rose from the rug and came to Harold's chair. The grown dog pressed his head under Harold's hand, insisting on touch. Harold smiled weakly. "See," he said, "the boy left us a soldier." Months passed. Men from North Star began visiting the town. They came first with bright brochures and polished shoes, smiling in church basements and community breakfasts. One of them delivered a fruit basket to Eleanor and told her the company admired long-time residents. Another offered to inspect the roof free of charge. Letters came with official looking stamps. Phone calls followed, always polite, always urgent, always full of words that made Eleanor feel foolish for not understanding faster. Harold understood enough to grow afraid, not for himself, for the house, for Eleanor, for the old neighbors who trusted men in ties because they still believed shame stopped. One evening, after a visit from a North Star representative who smelled of expensive cologne and wintergreen mints, Bishop stood at the front door long after the man left. His lips lifted slightly. A low growl trembled through him. Harold looked at the dog, then at the papers on the table. For the first time, he locked them in the drawer instead of leaving them by the phone. Near the end, Harold's body weakened faster than his will. He moved through the house like a man carrying invisible stones. Still, he kept notes. License plates, names, dates, words spoken too sweetly. Eleanor begged him to rest. He promised he would, then waited until she slept. On a bitter night with ice against the windows, Bishop woke from his place beside the bed and stood. Harold was not in the room. The dog found him in the woodshop behind the house, bent over the old workbench, coughing into a handkerchief spotted dark. The shop smelled of pine boards, sawdust, cold metal, and the cedar oil Harold rubbed into finished furniture. A single lamp burned over the bench. Harold had something in his hand, wrapped in cloth. Bishop whined. Harold looked down. His face had gone gray with pain, but his eyes cleared when he saw the dog. "Quiet now," he whispered. "You'll wake your grandmother." Bishop stepped close. Harold knelt with difficulty and tied a narrow strip of pine, scented cloth, to Bishop's collar. The old man's fingers fumbled twice before the knot held. "If the boy comes back," Harold said, breathing hard, "you take him where I couldn't." Bishop stared at him. Harold gave a tired laugh that was nearly a sob. "You always did listen better than people." He pressed his forehead against the dog's. "Bring him to what I leave behind." Bishop did not know death, not as humans know it, but he knew weakness. He knew the wrongness of Harold's breath. He knew the old man's hand was colder than it should have been. The dog barked once. Eleanor woke. By morning, Harold Cole was gone. The funeral was held 3 days later at the white church by the bend in the road. Snow fell lightly, softening the sound of tires and footsteps. Ruth sat beside Eleanor. Earl Fitch stood near the back with his cap in his hands. Neighbors came with casseroles and lowered eyes. Men from North Star sent flowers so white they seemed almost proud of themselves. At the front, beside Eleanor, one chair remained empty. Brennan's chair. Bishop lay beneath it through the entire service, muzzle on his paws, eyes open, guarding the absence as faithfully as he had guarded the living. Morning came pale over Brackenridge Falls. It did not arrive with warmth. It came as a thin silver light spreading across the frozen lake, touching the church steeple, the roofs of old houses, the flag outside the post office, and the snowbanks along Main Street. From the upstairs room above Ruth Mayfield's grocery store, Brennan Cole watched the town wake like a patient, pretending not to be sick. The room Ruth had given him was small, with sloped walls, a narrow iron bed, and a quilt stitched in faded red and blue squares. A single window faced the lake road. Brennan had not slept. He had sat in a wooden chair most of the night, boots still on, jacket across his knees, listening to his mother breathe in the room next door, and to Bishop shift every time a truck passed outside. The German shepherd had allowed Eleanor to sleep only after circling her bed twice and settling with his body against the door. Bishop's black and tan coat looked darker in the dim morning, his broad head resting on his paws, amber eyes open. He was 5 years old now, powerful, steady, and disciplined in the way of a dog who had learned that peace was not something given. It had to be guarded. Brennan rose before the store opened. He shaved in the little bathroom mirror with slow, careful strokes. His face looked unfamiliar to him in the blue light. 35, clean, shaven, square jaw set hard, gray, blue eyes, hollowed by too many things arriving at once. He had come home expecting an embrace, a kitchen lamp, perhaps an old argument about why he looked too thin. Instead, he had come home to a mother without a house and a father trapped behind glass. When he went downstairs, the grocery store was already alive. Ruth moved behind the counter with a coffee pot in one hand and a pencil tucked behind one ear. She wore a green cardigan over her apron this morning, her silver curls pinned up badly, as if she had dressed in a hurry but refused to let the town know it. The bell over the front door kept ringing. Older men and women came in stamping snow from their boots, greeting Ruth, glancing at Brennan, then looking away too quickly. Everyone knew him, or worse, everyone knew enough. Eleanor sat near the back table, a shawl over her shoulders. She had not let it out of reach, but she had turned it down, as if she could not bear for Harold to watch what the town had become. Bishop lay beneath her chair, head out, eyes scanning every pair of shoes. Ruth set a mug in front of Brennan. "You take it black like your father?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. Makes me feel like a tax notice." The line earned a small laugh from one of the old men at the counter, but it died quickly. Ruth leaned closer, lowering her voice. "If you're going to understand what happened, you shouldn't start with your house. You should start with everyone else's." Brennan looked around. At the nearest table sat a woman so small she seemed nearly swallowed by her beige winter coat. Her name, Ruth said, was Agnes Bell. She was 78, with a delicate face, thin white hair pinned neatly under a lavender knit hat, and pale blue eyes that watered from the cold even indoors. She held her purse with both hands on her lap as if someone might steal it. Her late husband had built their cabin by the lake after coming home from Korea. Agnes had lived there for 51 years. Across from her sat Carl Donnelly, 82, a retired Army mechanic and Vietnam veteran with a bony frame, a silver mustache, and one shoulder higher than the other from an old injury. His hands were large and knuckled, the nails clean but cracked from a lifetime. He wore his VFW cap low and kept looking toward the window, not because he expected someone, but because men like Carl learned long ago never to sit with their back fully to a door. At the counter was Nora Jean Barlow, 67, owner of the Sunrise Diner. She was tall and lean, with copper, red hair gone white at the temples, a long face, and a smoker's voice, though Ruth later whispered she had never smoked a day in her life. Nora Jean had the kind of sharp humor people used when fear had no polite place to sit. She wore red lipstick, pearl earrings, and a waitress uniform beneath her coat, as if armor could be made from routine. Ruth did not formally introduce them. She simply poured coffee, then said, "Brennan's home." The room changed. Agnes's eyes filled at once. Carl removed his cap. Nora Jean looked down at her hands. Brennan hated the pity, not because it was cruel, but because it was kind. Kindness. Said old boards and old widows, both deserved respect. Eleanor shut her eyes. Carl cleared his throat. Harold was a straight shooter, not loud, not flashy, straight. Nora Jean gave a humorless smile, which made him inconvenient around men who like crooked paperwork. Brennan sat slowly. "Tell me about North Star." No one answered right away. Outside, a snowplow rumbled by, pushing dirty snow against the curb. Its yellow light turned once across the window and vanished. Ruth said, "They came pretty first." That was how the story began. Not with threats, but with gifts. North Star Haven Development had arrived in Brackenridge Falls 4 years earlier, with glossy brochures and polite representatives in wool coats. They rented the old insurance office near the courthouse and hung a sign in brushed silver letters. They sponsored the church Christmas dinner. They donated blankets to the senior center. They paid to repaint the park benches and promised walking trails, a lakeside wellness center, new jobs, better roads, and a retirement community that would bring money back into a town slowly losing its young people. Their slogan appeared on banners by spring, "A new future by the lake." At first, even Ruth admitted, people wanted to believe it. The town had been shrinking. The hardware store had closed. The mill was long gone. Children grew up and moved to Minneapolis, Duluth, Fargo, anywhere with work and less snow. Old houses needed new roofs, and old people had more memories than a company offering to invest did not look like a wolf at first. It looked like rescue. Then the papers started. Agnes Bell received a letter saying she qualified for a senior property tax relief program. A young man from North Star offered to help her complete the forms. He was kind, she said, and patient. He called her Mrs. Bell and admired a photograph of her husband in uniform. She signed where he pointed. Months later, she learned one page had been replaced. Her signature appeared on a limited power of attorney, tied to a sale option on her land. "I thought I was saving my home," Agnes whispered. "Turns out I signed the door open." Carl Donnelly's trouble came through a roof repair. A contractor inspected his cabin after a windstorm and said North Star had a community assistance fund for seniors. Carl refused charity. The man laughed and called it a grant. 2 months later, Carl received a bill for $23,000 secured against the property. He had never agreed to a loan. "They put a lien on my house," Carl said, voice low. "My wife's ashes are under the maple out back, you understand? They're not buying land. They're asking me to sell the ground she sleeps in." Nora Jean's daughter worked at the county permit office in a temporary position. After Nora Jean asked too many questions about North Star's inspections, her daughter's hours were cut. Then someone reported the diner for health violations that did not exist. Nora Jean lifted her chin. "I've served eggs to half this town for 30 years. You know what they found? A cracked tile near the freezer. They wrote it up like I was poisoning babies." Ruth poured more coffee with a hard motion. Brennan listened without interrupting. His training had taught him that frightened people often gave the truth sideways, not because they meant to hide it, but because pain came out in pieces. Eleanor had not spoken yet. Brennan turned to her. "Mom." She looked at the coffee in her cup. "They called after your father died," she said. "A woman said she was with the county office. She knew my address, your father's death date, the property parcel number. She said there were unpaid assessments, and that if I didn't sign a temporary protection agreement, the house could be taken faster." "Did she say North Star?" "No, that was the clever part." Eleanor's voice remained soft, but the softness had an exhausted edge. She said she was helping widows avoid legal mistakes. Bishop lifted his head beneath the table. Eleanor's hand lowered to his fur. "The first time the man came with papers, Bishop stood between us, wouldn't move. The man laughed and said, 'Dogs don't understand contracts,'" Nora Jean muttered. "Neither do half the judges if the print's small enough." A small laugh broke around the table, thin but real. Then Bishop rose. No one had called him. No sound came from outside that Brennan could hear. But the German shepherd stepped out from under Eleanor's chair, crossed the room, and stopped near the front window. His body went still. Brennan followed his gaze across the street. Near the banner welcoming North Star, a man in a dark coat stood beside a parked SUV. He was not looking at the store directly. He was pretending to check his phone, but the phone was angled too high, and the stillness in his shoulders was wrong. Bishop released one low sound. The man across the street lowered the phone and turned away. Earl Fitch, the taxi driver from the night before, had just entered for coffee. He saw the man outside, then quickly looked down. Earl was old, thin, and stooped in daylight, with watery eyes and a jaw rough with gray stubble. He took off his knit cap and twisted it in his hands. "Morning, Ruth," he said too brightly. Brennan did not move toward the door. He only watched the SUV pull away. Ruth leaned beside him. "That's one of their boys, different coat, same smell." Brennan glanced at Bishop. The dog still stared through the glass after the SUV had vanished, as if memorizing the direction it took. For a moment, the room felt less like a grocery store than a chapel after someone heard footsteps in the vestibule. Every old face turned inward. Each person had a story. Each story had a paper. Each paper had a signature, and somewhere behind all those signatures was a hand that did not shake from age, but from greed. Brennan understood something then that he had missed in the night. North Star had not attacked his family alone. His family had simply been one house in a row of candles, the company meant to blow out. By mid-morning, Brennan walked to the sheriff's office, with Bishop at his side. Brackenridge Falls looked almost too beautiful in daylight. Sunlight glimmered on the frozen lake. Smoke rose from chimneys. The little white church seemed freshly washed by snow. American flags snapped along porches. A tourist passing through might have thought the town peaceful, charming, safe. But Brennan now saw the other layer. North Star brochures taped in windows, survey flags poking through snowbanks, a coming soon. Sign near the boat launch showing smiling retirees walking beneath digitally perfect pines. A black SUV parked too long beside the closed pharmacy, curtains shifting when he passed. Bishop stayed close, leash loose, but body alert. The sheriff's office occupied a brick building beside the municipal hall. Inside, it smelled of old coffee, floor wax, and damp wool. A young dispatcher looked up and froze slightly when she saw Brennan's face. Then Bishop, then the military bag still slung over his shoulder. Sheriff Arlen Pruitt came out of his office before she had to speak. He was 56, tall but gone soft around the middle, with a broad face marked by sleeplessness, a salt and pepper mustache, and gray hair combed carefully back, as if order on the outside might hide disorder within. His uniform was clean, his badge polished, but his eyes were red at the rims, and there was a heaviness in the way he carried his shoulders that Brennan recognized. Not guilt alone. Fear made old iron out of men. "Brennan Cole," Pruitt said, "Sheriff." Pruitt looked at Bishop. "That the dog Harold kept? That's Bishop." The sheriff's mouth tightened at Harold's name. "Your father was a good man. He was. I'm sorry you came home to all this. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for records." Pruitt exhaled through his nose. "If this is about the property claim, it's tangled up in civil proceedings. My office can't intervene in a land transfer dispute unless there's clear evidence of criminal conduct." Brennan studied him. Pruitt did not like the sentence he had just spoken that mattered. "My mother says she was pressured into signing. A lot of folks feel pressured when finances get hard. She was called by someone pretending to be county staff. That's difficult to prove. Her signature may have been forged." Pruitt's eyes flicked to the dispatcher, then back. "That's a serious allegation." It was meant to be. The sheriff stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've been gone a long time. This town has changed in ways you don't understand yet. If you start pushing without proof, you'll give them exactly what they need." "Who is them?" Pruitt's jaw worked. He did not answer. Bishop, standing beside Brennan, gave a soft huff. The sound was almost human in its judgment. Pruitt looked down at the dog, and for 1 second something unguarded passed over his face. Shame, maybe, or memory? Then the sheriff straightened. "Go home, Brennan. I don't have one." The words landed hard enough to quiet the room. Pruitt looked away first. Brennan did not press him, not yet. Men under pressure sometimes broke if pushed. Other times they sealed shut forever. Outside, Bishop pulled left, not hard, just enough to insist. "Where are?" Brennan murmured. The dog led him down the side street, past the county annex, past a row of frosted hedges toward the temporary North Star office in the old insurance building. The front windows had been dressed for charm, framed drawings of cabins, a model of the future resort, photographs of smiling gray-haired couples walking beside a blue summer lake. On the door, silver letters read, "North Star Haven Development Community Transition Office." Brennan did not go inside. Bishop guided him around back. There, behind a privacy fence, 3 trash bins stood near the service entrance. One lid had not closed properly. Paper edges fluttered in the cold. Bishop rose on his hind legs, sniffed, then looked back at Brennan. "No," Brennan said quietly, "we are not committing burglary because you smell something interesting." The dog stared at him. Brennan looked at the bin. It sat outside the building, beyond the office wall, not locked, not marked private, trash placed for collection. He almost smiled despite himself. "Fine, but if this goes sideways, I'm telling Mom it was your idea." Most of it was ordinary office waste. Coffee cups, brochure scraps, packaging, shredded paper. Then he found a stack of crumpled practice sheets. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. Then his stomach hardened. Across the pages, in blue ink, was the same name written again and again. Eleanor Cole. Some attempts were too large, some too shaky, some nearly perfect. Brennan spread the pages across the top of the bin with gloved hands. His mother's name stared back at him from a dozen failed versions, like someone had been rehearsing her disappearance. Bishop sniffed one page and sneezed. Footsteps sounded at the end of the alley. Brennan folded the pages quickly and stepped behind the bin with Bishop. A side door opened. A woman came out carrying a cardboard box. She was young, perhaps 25, with straight blonde hair under a white knit hat, a pale, nervous face, and the hurried movements of someone who had learned not to look too closely at her employer's business. She dumped the box into another bin and rushed back inside without seeing him. Brennan waited until the door shut. Then he walked back to Ruth's with the papers inside his jacket. When Ruth saw the signatures, all the color left her face. Eleanor sat very still. "I didn't write those," she whispered. "I know." Ruth picked up one page, hands trembling not from age but anger. "There's only one way those get used cleanly." "Who notarized North Star's documents?" Brennan asked. Ruth hesitated. "Nathaniel Price," she said. "Not the sheriff, different spelling. He had a little office off Maple Street. Notary, tax forms, estate papers, quiet man. Thin, always wore brown suits too big for him. Folks trusted him because he spoke softly and remembered birthdays." Had Ruth's eyes lifted. "He died 2 weeks ago." The house on Maple Street was small and pale yellow, with lace curtains in the windows and a snow-covered birdbath in the yard. A strip of black ribbon still hung on the door. The obituary taped inside the front window said Nathaniel Price, age 70, had passed suddenly from a stroke. A neighbor across the street watched Brennan from behind her curtain. Bishop climbed the porch steps and lowered his nose to the doorframe. At first, he sniffed normally. Then he stopped. His body tightened. A sound came out of him, not a growl this time, not warning exactly, a low, wounded whine, as if the door held a memory he could not explain to the humans around him. Brennan crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" Bishop pressed his nose to a narrow scratch near the bottom of the door. There was dried mud in the groove, and something else. A faint brown hair caught in the splintered wood, not human. Brennan touched it with the tip of one glove. Bishop looked past him toward the street, then back to the door, eyes dark and certain. Whatever had happened here, Bishop knew the scent, and Brennan, kneeling on a dead notary's porch beneath a winter sun too bright for the truth, it revealed, understood that the papers eating his mother's life had not been written by strangers alone. That night, Bishop would not lie down. The German shepherd stood at the front of Ruth Mayfield's grocery store, with his nose pointed toward the hill road, where the Cole house waited beyond the pines. The store was closed, its shelves dim beneath the yellow lights. Ruth always left on after dark, but Bishop remained at the door as if the night itself had knocked and only he had heard it. Brennan sat at the back table with the forged practice sheet spread in front of him. Eleanor had gone upstairs to rest, though rest was not the same. He could hear the soft boards creak above them whenever she crossed the room. Ruth had pulled the curtains tight and locked both doors twice. Outside, a hard wind dragged snow along Main Street in white ribbons. Bishop whined once, not loudly, not impatiently. It was a sound, low enough to belong to memory. Brennan looked up. "I know." The dog turned his head and stared at him. Brennan leaned back, rubbing one hand over his face. The day had given him too many doors, and no room to open them. North Star's lies, the old people's fear, Sheriff Pruitt's evasions, the dead notary, the practiced versions of Eleanor's name, and Bishop's reaction at Nathaniel Price's porch, that wounded recognition of a scent no human could read. He had spent 5 years in places where information mattered more than comfort. A thread, a footprint, a cigarette smoked by the wrong gate, a man looking away 1 second too soon. In war, small things could keep people alive. At home, small things seemed to have been killing them. Ruth came from the kitchen carrying a dish towel and wearing the stern expression of a woman who had already guessed what he was thinking. "You're not going up to that house tonight." Brennan did not answer. "That was not a question," she added. Ruth Mayfield might have been 66, short, round-shouldered, and wrapped in a cardigan with mismatched buttons, but there was iron in her voice. It was the same iron that had kept her store open through recessions, floods, and one winter when the furnace died, and she sold canned soup in gloves. Brennan folded the forged sheets carefully and put them inside his jacket. "He knows something." Ruth glanced at Bishop. The dog had taken Brennan's old handkerchief from the chair where Eleanor had left it. He held it gently between his teeth, not chewing, not playing. The cloth hung from his mouth like a flag of surrender brought from another battlefield. Ruth's face softened despite herself. "He's been looking at that hill since your mama came in." Brennan stood. The stairs creaked. Eleanor appeared halfway down, wrapped in Harold's old blue sweater. One hand on the rail. The sweater hung loosely on her thin frame, the patched elbow brushing the wall. Her silver-brown hair had slipped from its pins, and grief had made her eyes seem larger. "You're going back," she said. "I need to see what he's trying to show me. You saw what they did to the house. I won't be seen. That isn't what frightens me." Brennan looked at her. "What does?" Eleanor came down the last few steps slowly, as if every step crossed a year she had survived without wanting to. "They've watched that place for months. Sometimes a car sits on the road. Sometimes men walk the fence line with flashlights. They never break a window where anyone can see. They never shout. They just make sure you know the house is no longer yours, even before the law says so." Bishop carried the handkerchief to her and placed it at her feet. Eleanor stared down at it. Her mouth trembled. "He did that the night your father went out to the shop," she whispered. Brennan went still. "What shop?" She closed her eyes. "The wood shop behind the house. Harold spent his last weeks in there whenever he thought I was asleep. I thought he was making peace with his tools. Maybe he was making peace with something else." Bishop nudged the handkerchief forward. Ruth crossed her arms. "If you go, I go as lookout." "No, yes, Ruth." "Don't use that military voice on me, Brennan Cole. I changed your diapers in the church nursery once. Your tactical authority has limits." For the first time since he had come home, something like a laugh almost moved through him. It did not reach his mouth, but Ruth saw it and nodded as if satisfied. They left Eleanor upstairs with the phone beside her and the lights low. Eleanor did not beg him again. She only held his hand at the door, her fingers cold but firm. "Don't go in angry," she said. Brennan looked toward the hill. "I'm past angry. That's what worries me." The walk to the Cole property took 12 minutes through side streets and a narrow path behind the closed barber shop. Ruth stayed half a block back, wrapped in a long, dark coat, with a wool hat pulled down over her curls. She carried an old flashlight but kept it off. Bishop moved ahead of Brennan, silent except for the soft crunch of paws in snow. The town had gone quiet, not peaceful quiet, listening quiet. At the top of the hill, the Cole house sat like a wounded animal in the dark. The red North Star sign on the fence swung in the wind with a faint metallic tap. The boards over the windows made the house look blind. Brennan crouched near the split rail fence and watched for 5 full minutes. No flashlight inside, no vehicle in the lane, no fresh footprints near the front steps except old ones half filled by drifting snow. He touched Bishop's shoulder. Slow. The dog understood tone if not words. He lowered his head and moved with controlled purpose along the fence line, not toward the front door but toward the side yard. Brennan followed, using the shadows of the pines. He did not come as the son of Harold Cole. Not yet. He came as a man trained to enter a dangerous place and leave no opportunity for his enemies. The back door near the mudroom had been damaged long before North Star nailed their sign outside. Harold had fixed that door 3 times. It still stuck in the winter and opened if you lifted the knob before turning it. Brennan remembered because as a teenager he had snuck out through it, and Harold had let him believe he got away with it tonight. The door gave under his hand. The smell hit first. Dust, cold wood, old stove ash. Mildew from a house left without heat. Under it all, faint but unmistakable, was his childhood cedar shavings, floor polish, his mother's lavender soap, his father's pipe tobacco, though Harold had quit smoking 20 years before, and kept the pipe only because his hands liked holding it. Bishop stepped inside and froze. Brennan closed the door behind them. The kitchen was half-stripped. Cabinet doors hung open. Drawers had been pulled out and shoved back carelessly. A mug lay broken near the sink. One Eleanor used to keep by the stove. The breakfast table was pushed against the wall. On the floor beneath it sat Bishop's old bowl, cracked at one edge, dusty but still there. The dog went to the bowl and lowered his nose. For a moment, the strong guardian vanished. And Brennan saw the pup he had left behind, all big paws and solemn eyes, waiting in a kitchen that no longer had laughter in it. Bishop licked the cracked rim once. Then he lifted his head and moved on. Brennan followed through the hallway. Family photographs had been taken off the wall and stacked face down on a chair. He turned one over with 2 fingers. It was a summer picture. Brennan at 12 holding a fish too small to brag about. Harold pretending it was enormous. Eleanor laughing with one hand raised to block the sun. He put it back face down, not because he did not care, because if he looked too long, he might forget why he was there. In the doorway to the living room, Bishop stopped again, his ears tilted toward the staircase, then away. He did not choose the stairs. He turned toward the back hall leading to the woodshop. Brennan's chest tightened. The shop was attached to the rear of the house by a narrow enclosed passage Harold had built when Brennan was 9. A man should be able to reach his tools without freezing his ears off, Harold had said. The passage still held hooks for coats, old fishing line, a rusted saw blade, and one of Brennan's childhood sleds hanging crooked on the wall. At the end of it, the shop door stood ajar. Bishop entered first. The wood shop was colder than the house, but somehow more alive. Tools still hung on the pegboard in Harold's careful order. Chisels, planes, clamps, a handsaw with tape around the handle. The big workbench sat beneath the single lamp. Though the bulb was dead now, sawdust still lay in the corners like golden powder gone gray with time. Brennan stood in the doorway and could almost see his father there. Harold broad, shouldered in flannel, pencil behind one ear, pretending the chair leg was crooked on purpose. Harold humming old hymns off. Key. Harold teaching him that a nail driven in anger bent faster than one driven with patience. Bishop went to the far corner. There, near a stack of scrapboards, the dog lowered his body and began to claw at the floor. Brennan crouched beside him. Here? Bishop scraped harder, claws striking wood. The floorboard beneath him was not nailed like the others. Brennan ran his gloved fingers along the edge and found a seam. His pulse slowed, not from calm but from focus. He took a flathead screwdriver from Harold's bench and worked it into the gap. The board lifted with a groan. Beneath it sat a small tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Bishop stepped back. Brennan did not touch the box at first. His hand hovered above it. It was absurd. How heavy small things could be. A man could carry weapons, packs, bodies, orders, years of silence. Then a tin box beneath an old floor could make his fingers shake. He lifted it out. The oilcloth smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil. Inside the tin were 5 things: a folded letter, a small brass key darkened with age, a photograph, bent at one corner, a strip of cloth from Bishop's old collar, stained brown near one edge, and a scrap of paper with half an address burned away. Brennan unfolded the letter. The handwriting was Harold's, but weaker than he remembered, each line pressed too hard in places, fading in others. Son, if you come home late, do not waste your first strength blaming yourself. A man can be absent and still be loved. I chose not to call you back because I knew you would come, and I could not bear the thought of making your duty smaller just because my body was failing. Brennan's vision blurred. He lowered the page and looked away. The shop around him seemed to breathe. Bishop, without being told, leaned against his side. Brennan pressed one hand into the dog's fur and forced himself to keep reading. What is happening here is not only about our house. It is about Agnes, Carl, Nora, Jean, and half the old folks around the lake. They are using kind words, false debts, inspections and signatures to take what people built over lifetimes. The man helping them is not a stranger. That is the part that shames me most. He sat with us, he prayed with us, he stood beside me at, the ink smeared there, water, perhaps, or blood. The next Brennan tried to read through it, angling the paper toward the faint moonlight through the window. Nothing. A sound escaped his throat, low and wounded, not unlike the one Bishop had made at the grocery door. The photograph showed Blaine Huxley standing on the steps of the county records office. Brennan had never met him, but he knew power when he saw. Huxley was a polished man in his late 40s, tall, narrow-waisted, with silver, threaded dark hair combed back from a smooth forehead, a clean-shaven face too controlled to be warm, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He wore a charcoal overcoat and leather gloves, the kind of man who looked comfortable entering rooms where others felt grateful to be noticed. Beside him stood another man whose face was turned partly away. Older, broad shoulders, county badge clipped to his belt, a hand extended toward Huxley in what might have been a handshake. Brennan turned the photo over. Harold had written one word: records. The strip of Bishop's collar was stiff with old, dried blood. Brennan looked at the dog. What happened here? Bishop stared at the lifted floorboard, then toward the shop door. His ears shifted. Brennan heard it a second later. A vehicle outside. No headlights swept the wall. Whoever had arrived knew better than to announce themselves. Brennan extinguished his small flashlight and slid the tin box inside his jacket. He stepped behind the doorframe, one hand resting lightly on Bishop's back to keep him still. Footsteps approached the shop from outside, slow, careful, snow compressed under boots. The door opened. A man stepped in without turning on a light. Sheriff Arlen Pruitt. In the darkness, Pruitt looked older than he had in his office. The brim of his hat shadowed his eyes. Snow dusted the shoulders of his brown sheriff's coat. One hand hovered near his sidearm, not drawing, but not relaxed either. Brennan moved behind him. "Looking for something, Sheriff?" Pruitt flinched and spun halfway, his hand dropping to the pistol. Bishop's growl filled the shop, deep enough to make the hanging tools tremble. "Easy," Pruitt hissed, lifting his hand away from the weapon. "Easy, I'm not here for trouble." Brennan stayed where he was. "Then why are you in my father's shop after midnight?" Pruitt's breathing was hard. In the little light from the window, Brennan saw the sheriff's face clearly now. The man was not drunk, not corrupt in the careless way of men who enjoyed power. He looked hunted. His salt and pepper mustache twitched as he clenched his jaw, and the red rims of his eyes made him seem like he had not slept properly in months. "I saw Ruth leave the store," Pruitt said. "Figured where you'd go? You followed her?" "I followed you to keep you from getting boxed in." "By who?" Pruitt glanced toward the lifted floorboard. His shoulders sagged. "So he did leave it." Brennan stepped closer. "You knew?" Pruitt closed his eyes briefly. "Harold came to me 6 months before he died. Had notes, names, copies of letters. He said North Star wasn't buying land clean. He said people were being cornered. And you did nothing." The words were quiet. They hit harder that way. Pruitt did not defend himself at once. He looked at Harold's workbench, at the tools still waiting for hands that would never return. I told him land disputes were civil. I told him to bring me proof I could use." "Did you believe him?" Pruitt's silence answered. Brennan felt heat rise behind his eyes. "My father came to you?" "Yes, and you sent him back alone." Pruitt's face tightened. "My son owed money." Brennan stopped. The sheriff swallowed. "Not to Huxley directly, to men behind one of North Star's financing groups. Bad loans, gambling, stupid choices. They knew. They made sure I knew. They knew. Every time I thought about stepping in, something landed on my desk. A photo, a number, a reminder. So you let them take old people's homes." Pruitt looked at him then, and there was no authority left in his face, only shame. "I let myself believe delay wasn't the same as betrayal." Bishop's growl faded to a low rumble. Brennan wanted to hate him cleanly. It would have been easier. There was a part of him, young and furious and newly fatherless, that wanted to put Pruitt against the wall and demand the years back. But another part, the colder, trained part, saw the truth in front of him. Pruitt was not the wolf. He was the gatekeeper who heard wolves and locked his own door. Sometimes cowardice wore a badge and called itself procedure. Brennan took out the photograph and held it up. "Who is with Huxley?" Pruitt looked. His face changed before he could hide it. Held it up. "Who is with Huxley?" Pruitt looked. His face changed before he could hide it. "Rickord's office," Brennan said. "My father wrote that word on the back." Pruitt took a breath, then shook his head. "Not here, not tonight. Tell me, if Huxley knows you found that box, he'll move faster. Maybe tonight. Then talk faster." Pruitt looked toward the house. North Star doesn't just want your family's place. They want the whole lakeside strip before spring." "Why before spring?" the sheriff hesitated. Bishop stepped forward, placing himself between the men, not as a threat this time, but as if measuring which one carried the truer fear. Pruitt's voice dropped until the shop itself seemed to lean in. "Because the state environmental inspection team is coming back when the ice thaws, and there's something along that shoreline North Star does not want anyone testing." They did not leave the Cole woodshop as three people walking away from an old house. They left like survivors carrying a coal from a dead fire, afraid the wind might take it before it could become flame again. Brennan kept the small tin box under his jacket as he, Bishop, Ruth, and Sheriff Arlen Pruitt moved back through the trees behind the property. The night had grown colder, sharpening every sound. Branches clicked above them. Snow crust cracked beneath their boots. Somewhere down by the lake, the ice groaned with a low, ancient complaint, as if the whole northern earth were shifting in its sleep. Ruth walked close to Brennan, though she tried to pretend she was not nervous. The little grocery store owner was wrapped in her dark coat, her silver curls hidden beneath a brown wool hat. One gloved hand gripping the flashlight she still refused to turn on. On in daylight, Ruth could scold a grown man into eating soup. In the dark behind the Cole house, she looked smaller, but not weaker. Some people shrank when fear found them. Ruth seemed to harden around it. Pruitt followed several paces behind. The sheriff's shoulders were bent beneath more than weather. At the woodshop, he had spoken of fear, debt, and silence, and the confession had not freed him. It had only made him look like a man who finally saw the size of the hole he had helped dig. Bishop moved ahead of them, black, and tan coat blending with shadow and snow. The German shepherd did not pull, did not wander. He checked the path, paused, listened, and moved again. His scarred ear flicked toward every tree line, every distant engine, every whisper of wind around the frozen lake. By the time they reached Ruth's grocery store, the town was asleep above the surface and restless below it. Eleanor was waiting at the back table. She had not gone back upstairs. Harold's portrait sat beside her, upright now facing the room. In the yellow kitchen light, Eleanor looked both fragile and unbreakable. Her hands were folded on the tabletop, the skin thin over her knuckles, but her eyes were awake in a way Brennan had not seen since coming home. Fear still lived there, yes, but something else had joined it. Expectation. Bishop crossed to her at once and pressed his head under her hand. Eleanor looked at Brennan's jacket. "You found something." Brennan took out the tin box and set it on the table. No one spoke for a moment. Ruth locked the front door again, then closed the shades. Though they were already closed, Pruitt stood near the counter, hat in both hands. He looked like a sheriff who no longer knew whether he had the right to stand in uniform. Brennan opened the box and laid the objects out one by one, the unfinished letter, the brass key, the bent photograph, the stained strip from Bishop's old collar, the half-burned address. Eleanor reached for the strip of collar first. Her fingers hovered over the dried brown stain. "I remember this," she whispered. "He came back with blood on his neck one morning. I thought he had cut himself on the fence." Bishop lifted his head. Eleanor looked down at him. "You wouldn't let me touch it. Harold said you were just sore." Brennan's jaw tightened. "He lied to protect you. He did that often." Eleanor's voice was soft, almost fond, and that made it hurt more. Ruth picked up the brass key. She turned it under the light, squinting. "I've seen this kind." Pruitt looked over. "Where?" "Church basement." Ruth held it closer to the lamp. old file cabinets. Before the county digitized half the records and lost the other half, the church kept copies of community documents, deeds, charity repairs, hardship assistance, old meeting minutes. Pastor Lila still has the cabinets. Pastor Lila? Brennan asked. Lila Cormack, Ruth said. She came here after Pastor Glenn retired, mid-50s, tall as a fence post, hair black with one silver streak right in front, looks severe until she smiles. Then you remember God didn't send her to frighten children. She knows every widow's birthday and every veteran's coffee order. Pruitt put his hat back on. Church opens at 6 for the food pantry. Ruth gave him a dry look. Sheriff, if I walk over there and knock at midnight, Lila will open. She knows trouble when it wears boots. The church of Brackenridge Falls stood at the bend in the road, white against the snow, its steeple pointing into the dark like a finger refusing to let heaven look away. Its windows were stained glass, but simple, more color than art, blue and gold pieces forming a lake, a dove, a cross. Pastor Lila Cormack opened the side door before Ruth knocked a second time. She was 54, tall and angular, with warm brown skin, clear dark eyes, and black hair cut to her jaw with a single silver streak near her left temple. She wore a long gray cardigan over jeans and winter boots, as if holiness, in her opinion, had no need to be uncomfortable. Her face was composed, but when she saw Eleanor beside Brennan, something fierce passed across it. "Come in," she said. "No one stands outside with that much sorrow." The church basement smelled of old coffee, floor wax, hymnals, and folded metal chairs. Along one wall hung photographs of veterans from Brackenridge Falls, some sepia, some color, some recent enough that Brennan recognized high school faces grown older in uniform. Harold had helped build the wooden frames around those photographs. Brennan knew because one frame had a corner joint only his father would have shaped that way, precise and stubborn. On the bulletin board near the stairs, a glossy new sign read, "North Star Haven proudly supports the Brackenridge Falls Community Heritage Program." Brennan stared at it. The words seemed almost obscene in that room. Pastor Lila saw his expression. "They paid for the new pantry freezer," she said quietly. "I took the money because hungry people needed food. I did not take their blessing." Ruth gave a short nod. "That distinction may matter before this is over." The old file cabinet stood behind a curtain near the furnace. 4 tall cabinets, olive green, chipped at the edges, each drawer labeled in Lila's careful handwriting. The brass key fit the second cabinet from the left. Ruth opened it. Inside were folders wrapped in string, old envelopes, carbon copies, typed records, handwritten donation logs, and yellowing maps. Ruth moved with surprising confidence, muttering years under her breath. "Harold knew the church kept what the county called clutter," she said. "He always said paper remembered better than people." Brennan stood beside her, Bishop at his knee. Pruitt remained near the stairs, one hand on the rail, as if unsure whether he belonged with the searchers or the accused. At last, Ruth pulled a folder free. "Elias Vane," she said. Pastor Lila's face changed. Brennan noticed. "You know him?" "Everyone used to." Lila took the folder gently. Elias was a lawyer before he was a cautionary tale. Elias Vane had been 61 when the trouble swallowed his name. In the file photograph clipped to an old church directory, he appeared as a thin man with a narrow face, thoughtful gray eyes, and a neatly trimmed white beard that made him look more like a schoolteacher than an attorney. His hair had receded far back, leaving a high forehead lined by worry. He wore tweed jackets and crooked ties. Ruth said he walked with a slight limp from a childhood accident and had a habit of tapping his pen 3 times before signing anything. He helped people who couldn't pay, Ruth said. Wills, deeds, insurance forms. He explained paperwork to folks who were too embarrassed to admit they couldn't understand it. He was kind, Eleanor whispered. Harold trusted him. Pruitt looked down. Brennan heard the silence as clearly as speech. What happened to him? Brennan asked. Pastor Lila closed the folder. He accused North Star of using false notaries and altered documents. A month later, he was found outside a bar in Ash Creek with his car in a ditch and whiskey spilled on the passenger seat. Elias said he had not been drinking. No one believed him. Ruth's mouth tightened. They made him look like an old fool. Then they made sure anyone who defended him looked foolish, too. Where is he now? Rehabilitation residence near St. Cloud, Lila said. His niece moved him there after the court suspended his license pending review. He stopped answering calls. Bishop suddenly rose. The movement was so sharp that all eyes turned to him. The dog had his nose buried in the Elias Vane folder. He sniffed the corner of one envelope, then stiffened. A low vibration began in his chest, not loud enough to be a growl, but too deep to ignore. Brennan took the envelope. On the front, in faint blue ink, was a return address from an old storage warehouse near the North Dock. Ruth frowned. That building's leased by North Star now for lumber and construction equipment. Bishop pulled toward the basement stairs. Pastor Lila touched the cross at her neck. That dog has been carrying more truth than this town deserved. Brennan looked at Bishop, then at the old envelope. For one breath, the basement seemed to tilt backward through time. Harold's hand on a workbench, Elias Vane's pen tapping before a signature, Bishop standing between old people and strangers, a dog remembering a scent men had tried to bury under snow, shame, and paperwork. Brennan had seen faith take many forms. Some men found it in chapels, some in foxholes, some in the hand of the person pulling them out of fire. That night, in a church basement beneath the hum of a furnace, faith looked like a German shepherd refusing to forget. They went to the North Dock before dawn. Pruitt drove, because if anyone stopped them, his badge still carried weight. Brennan sat in the passenger seat, Bishop behind him, Ruth and Pastor Lila in the back. Eleanor stayed at the grocery store under lock and light, though she had wanted to come. Brennan had asked her to remain, and for once she had not argued. Perhaps she saw that this was not only about courage, it was about not giving North Star another body to threaten. The old storage warehouse crouched near the frozen lake, a long corrugated building with a sagging roof and loading doors facing the water. In summer, fishermen used to store nets there. Now North Star had hung signs along the fence and stacked lumber beneath tarps. A security light buzzed above the side entrance, throwing a cone of pale light over tire tracks and boot prints. Brennan studied the building. "No forced entry," he said. Pruitt nodded. "Side bay is town. Owned access. Lease line starts past the interior fence. We can step inside the public bay if there's reason to believe there's a safety issue." Ruth looked at him. "You came up with that fast." "I've spent years knowing where the lines were," Pruitt said. "Tonight, I'm trying to use them right." Inside, the public bay smelled of lake ice, diesel, wet rope, and pine lumber. Bishop's nose worked immediately. He moved past stacked pallets, past rolled tarps, past crates marked for resort construction. Brennan followed, careful not to disturb more than necessary. At the back, behind upright sheets of plywood, Bishop stopped. There was a narrow gap between the plywood and the wall. In it hung an old brown coat, stiff with dust. Pastor Lila inhaled sharply. "That's Elias's." Brennan looked at her. "He wore it everywhere," she said. said it had pockets big enough for other people's problems. The coat had been shoved into the gap as if hidden in haste. One sleeve was torn. A button dangled by a thread. Bishop sniffed the cuff, then pressed his nose to the wall behind it. Brennan ran his hand along the boards and felt a loose piece of trim. Behind it was a small digital recorder wrapped in plastic. No one spoke. Pruitt put on gloves before taking it. His face had gone pale beneath his mustache. "We preserve this. We listen first," Brennan said. "If it's evidence. If it tells us someone is in danger now, we listen." Pruitt looked at him for a long second, then nodded once. The recorder crackled when Brennan pressed play. For several seconds there was only static and the hollow echo of a large room. Then a man's voice emerged, weak but distinct. "Harold, if I don't come back, look at the inspection certificate on your furnace, the one they filed after I told you not to sign anything. The name on that paper matters." He didn't just sign one form. He gave them a doorway into every old house on the lake. Brennan's skin went cold. Elias Vane's voice trembled, but the mind behind it remained sharp. "They are targeting widows, veterans, anyone with property and no one close enough to fight the first letter. The notary records are wrong. Some signatures were copied from church assistance forms." Nathaniel knew. "I think he tried to back out." A door opened on the recording. Elias stopped speaking. Another voice entered, male, lower, close enough to the recorder that the words scraped through the static. "You should have let old people die in peace." "Elias," there was movement, a hard thud, a gasp. Then the recorder cut into a burst of static and stopped. Ruth covered her mouth. Pastor Lila closed her eyes. Pruitt stood with the recorder in his gloved hand, looking like the last excuse had been taken from him. Brennan did not speak. The anger inside him had gone still, which was worse. Hot anger rushed, cold anger remembered. Bishop moved to the torn sleeve of Elias's coat and nudged it once with his nose. By mid-morning they were back in the church basement with the recorder sealed in a plastic evidence bag Pruitt had retrieved from his cruiser. Brennan had taken photographs of the coat and location before anything was moved. Pruitt called the county evidence technician, but not through the public dispatcher. He used a direct number and spoke in clipped, careful phrases. Ruth brewed coffee in the church kitchen, though her hands shook. Pastor Lila opened the old furnace inspection file for the Cole house. There, clipped behind a yellowed permit form, was a copy of the certificate that had declared the property unsafe for occupancy after Harold's death. It cited structural furnace risk, inadequate ventilation, and immediate hazard to elderly occupant. Eleanor had been forced out because of it. Brennan read the page once. Then again, at the bottom was a signature. He looked at Pruitt. The sheriff saw the question and did not answer quickly enough. "Who signed it?" Brennan asked. Pruitt removed his hat. His hand dragged once through his gray hair. "Brennan? Who signed it?" Before Pruitt could respond, Ruth's phone rang. She answered on the second ring. Her face hardened, then drained. "What?" she said. "No, that inspection was last year." "I passed last year." She listened. Brennan watched her knuckles whiten around the phone. Ruth ended the call slowly. "County health inspection," she said. "Tomorrow morning, anonymous complaint. They say if my back kitchen isn't up to updated code, they can suspend food service." Pastor Lila's mouth tightened. "They're moving." Pruitt's phone buzzed next. He read the message. Agnes Bell received a letter from North Star's legal office. They're accusing her of violating terms of her property assistance agreement. Another buzz. Pruitt's face darkened. Carl Donnelly has 72 hours to vacate pending lien enforcement. Ruth whispered a word. No church basement should have heard, then looked at Pastor Lila. "Forgive me later," the pastor said. "I was thinking worse." Brennan turned toward the basement window outside. The town looked bright under a winter sun. A postcard town, a town fit for a brochure, yet beneath that brightness, old people were being cornered in their kitchens, one letter at a time. That night, Brennan called the rehabilitation residence near St. Cloud. It took 3 transfers and 1 nurse who did not want trouble before Elias Vane came to the phone. His voice sounded older than 61, thin, dry. A voice left too long in rooms where no one believed it. "Who is this?" "My name is Brennan Cole." Silence. Then a breath. "Harold," the line crackled. "I told him to stop," Elias whispered. "I told him they would not forgive him for noticing." "What did he know?" "Enough to be afraid for your mother." Brennan closed his eyes. "Mr. Vane, I found your recording." Elias made a small sound, part fear, part relief. "Then you know about the inspection paper?" "I know it matters. I need the name." Elias began breathing faster. No, phones are not safe. This line is through a care facility. You think that stops men who buy clerks?" Brennan's grip tightened on the receiver. Elias continued. Lower now. "Harold knew the name. He knew before I did. That was why he hid things in pieces. He said one truth in one place could be burned, but a truth scattered among honest people might survive." "Who was it?" A door closed somewhere on Elias's end of the line. He went silent. "Mr. Vane." When Elias spoke again, his voice was nearly gone. He stood in the front row at the funeral. Brennan felt the room narrow around him. "Say the name." "I can't. Not yet. If I say it wrong, they'll call me confused again. They'll say the old drunk lawyer is hearing ghosts." "Find the furnace paper. Find who signed it. Then you won't need my memory. You'll have his hand." The line clicked. Brennan remained with the receiver pressed to his ear long after the call ended. Across the room, Bishop lifted his head from beside Eleanor's chair and stared toward the window, ears forward, body still. Outside, a car rolled slowly past Ruth's store without headlights. Brennan came back to Ruth Mayfield's grocery store when the sky was no longer black, but not yet morning. That hour had always felt strange to him. In the field, it was the hour when men got careless because they believed the night had already released them. In Brackenridge Falls, it was the hour when snow turned blue outside the windows, when the lake lay silent beneath its skin of ice, and when the old town looked as innocent as a sleeping child. But Brennan no longer believed in innocent surfaces. He entered through the back door with Bishop at his side. The German shepherd stepped in first, then his black and tan coat still carried the cold from outside. His broad chest rose and fell slowly, but his ears kept moving, catching the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of pipes, the whisper of Ruth turning pages somewhere in the front room. Eleanor was awake. She sat at the small kitchen table behind the store, wrapped in Harold's blue sweater, her silver brown hair loose around her face. There was a cup of coffee waiting across from her. Not hot anymore, but not cold either. She must have poured it when she heard his footsteps in the alley. Brennan stopped in the doorway. His mother looked so small beneath the kitchen light. Yet there was a steadiness in the way she held herself now that had not been there when he found her in the snow. Grief had bent her, but truth was beginning to straighten something inside her. "You found more," she said. Brennan sat down slowly. Bishop came to Eleanor first, pressing his muzzle against her knee. She rested her hand on his head, fingers sinking into the thick fur. Brennan did not want to begin with the recording, or the inspection paper, or the name waiting at the bottom of the form. There was something else between him and his mother, something older than North Star. "I should have known," he said. Eleanor's eyes softened at once. "No, I spent 5 years thinking no news meant you were safe. It meant we loved you enough not to pull you apart." His jaw tightened. "Mom, your father was afraid of one thing near the end," she said. "Not dying." Harold made his peace with death in the way stubborn men do, mostly by refusing to discuss it directly. A faint, aching smile crossed her face. "What he feared was you coming home and thinking you had abandoned us." Brennan looked down at his hands. He had used those hands to climb, strike, carry, hold a weapon steady, drag wounded men through dust, open doors that were not meant to open. Yet at that table, they looked useless. "I thought if something terrible happened, someone would find a way to tell me." Eleanor looked toward the dark window. "I took out the emergency contact packet once. Your father saw me. He stopped you. He said you would come if I called. He knew that as surely as he knew sunrise, and because he knew it, he asked me not to." Brennan closed. All through those years, there had been nights when he imagined the phone ringing somewhere back home. Imagined his mother reaching for it. Imagined news being stopped by distance and secrecy. He had told himself silence was mercy. Silence meant ordinary days. Silence meant Harold was fixing steps. Eleanor was baking. He had not understood that silence could be a room where old people held pain between them, so their son could keep standing somewhere far away. "I would have come," he whispered. "I know. I would have broken every rule. I know that too." Her answer did not comfort him. It shattered him more cleanly. Bishop left Eleanor's side and came around the table. He did not jump or whine. He simply placed his heavy head on Brennan's knee, the way he had placed himself against Harold's chair in the months Brennan never saw. The dog did not know classified orders, guilt, or the cruel math of duty. He knew only that sorrow had weight, and weight could be shared. Brennan put one hand on Bishop's head. For the first time since coming home, the tears came. They did not come loudly. No sob shook him. His shoulders barely moved. But the tears slipped down his face with the quiet defeat of a man who had survived too long by postponing grief. Eleanor reached across the table and held his other hand. No one spoke. In the front room, Ruth stopped turning pages. Perhaps she heard, perhaps she simply knew. Good women in small towns often knew when to let a man's dignity remain standing while his heart knelt. After a while, Brennan wiped his face with the heel of his hand. Then he took out the copy of the furnace inspection certificate. The paper lay between them like a blade. Ruth came in carrying a folder from the church records. She had changed into a gray sweater and tied her apron over it, as if work could hold her together. Her hazel eyes were tired but sharp. Sheriff Arlen Pruitt entered a moment later through the rear door. He looked. His salt and pepper mustache was damp from the cold. His uniform collar sat crooked, and the skin under his eyes had the gray cast of a man running out of excuses. He carried an official county lookup printout. Pastor Lila had stayed at the church to secure the old file. Elias's recording was being preserved. The town was not awake yet, but the truth had begun to move. Pruitt placed the county printout beside the certificate. "There," he said. Brennan read the name at the bottom of the inspection form, Orson Rusk. Eleanor made a sound so small Brennan almost missed it. Ruth closed her eyes. "Lord help us." Orson Rusk was 58. though he had always looked older in the way of men who wanted age to seem like authority. He managed land records for the county annex, a broad-shouldered man with thinning, sandy, gray hair, a square face, and heavy eyelids that made him appear patient even when he was calculating. Brennan remembered him from years ago. Orson wore pressed shirts, polished boots, and a brown leather belt with a brass buckle. He spoke slowly, often with one hand resting over his stomach, as if delivering wisdom rather than opinion. He had been in the Cole kitchen many times. That was the part that struck like betrayal dressed in Sunday clothes. Eleanor stared at the name. He ate my apple pie. No one answered. He sat right there, she continued, pointing to the kitchen chair beside Brennan. Her voice trembled, but not with confusion. It trembled because memory had teeth. After Harold fixed his porch rail, I made coffee. Bishop was still young then. Orson scratched him behind the ear and said dogs were better judges of people than most voters. Bishop's ears twitched at the name. Brennan looked down at him. The dog had gone very still. Pruitt spoke carefully. Rusk controls archival property records, parcel histories, old easements, tax assessment corrections. If North Star wanted to know which households were vulnerable, he could find it. Ruth's voice was bitter. Widows, veterans, people behind on taxes, folks with children out of state. Medical liens, Pruitt added, probate delays, properties without updated trusts, houses owned by one elderly occupant. He would know all of it. Eleanor leaned back, and for a moment she looked more tired than afraid. He told me after Harold died that paperwork could be confusing for women grieving alone. He said I should trust him to look over anything important. Brennan felt something inside him go cold. This was not a man breaking a window. This was worse. Orson Rusk had walked through the front door with clean hands. He had accepted coffee. He had used Harold's friendship, Eleanor's grief, Bishop's familiarity, and the language of helpfulness to map where the town was weakest. He had not swung the hammer that broke the door. He had handed the key to men who would. Pruitt turned the printout around. Rusk signed off on more than your mother's furnace inspection. I found related safety flags on 9 properties near the lake. Agnes Bell, Carl Donnelly. Nora Jean's rental building, 2 cabins owned by sisters in assisted living. Every file had North Star correspondence within 30 days. Ruth gripped the back of a chair. Brennan looked at Pruitt. Can you take this to the county prosecutor? I already called her. As if summoned by the words, headlights swept across the rear alley. Bishop rose immediately, placing himself between Eleanor and the door. A vehicle stopped outside. Pruitt touched his sidearm. Brennan raised one hand, listening. There was a knock. Firm. 2 short taps. 1 pause. Then another. Pruitt exhaled. That's her. The woman who stepped into Ruth's back room brought the cold with her and something sharper than authority. Lydia Kessler was 48, medium height, with a compact frame, smooth dark skin, and black hair cut short close to the head. Her eyes were a steady brown, direct enough to make lies feel poorly dressed. She wore a navy wool coat over a plain suit, winter boots with salt on the edges, and carried a leather satchel so worn it seemed older than her office. She had the controlled presence of a person who did not waste anger, storing it instead until it could become action. Brennan Cole, she asked. Yes, Lydia Kessler, county prosecutor. She glanced at Eleanor, then at Bishop, then at the papers on the table. Her expression changed when she saw Harold's name. I knew your father, she said quietly. He repaired the ramp at the courthouse after my mother started using a walker. He refused payment and told me justice moves slowly enough without making old women climb stairs. Eleanor's eyes filled again. Lydia removed her gloves. Sheriff Pruitt says you have evidence of forged signatures, coercive property transfers, improper safety citations, and possible evidence tampering. Brennan looked at Pruitt. The sheriff did not look away. I have pieces, Brennan said. My father hid some. Elias Vane recorded some. Ruth has camera footage. The people in town have letters, contracts, calls. But pieces won't be enough if North Star gets time to bury them. Lydia sat down. Then we do not give them time. For the next hour, the back room of Ruth's grocery store became a war room without guns. Brennan laid out the evidence in order. The forged practice signatures found in discarded office papers. Harold's photograph of Blaine Huxley with an unidentified county records official. The furnace inspection signed by Orson Rusk. The old church file linking Elias Vane to warnings about altered documents. The recording from the warehouse. Ruth's security camera footage from months earlier, showing 2 North Star men at the Cole property after midnight. Pruitt added the pattern of safety flags and property pressure notices. Lydia listened without interrupting. She took notes in a small black notebook, her handwriting quick and clean. This becomes stronger with sworn statements, she said. Agnes Bell, Carl Donnelly, Nora Jean Barlow, your mother Ruth, Pastor Lila. Elias, if he can be stabilized enough to give a recorded statement with counsel present. He's scared, Brennan said. Scared witnesses can still tell the truth, Lydia replied. We protect the process so their fear does not become the defense's weapon. Brennan liked her for that. Not warmth, not sympathy, precision. By late morning, word had begun to travel quietly. Ruth made calls from the store phone. Pastor Lila called from Pruitt sent one deputy he trusted, a young man named Mateo Cruz, to collect Agnes and Carl without using the public radio. Mateo was 29, lean and dark-haired, with earnest eyes and a nervous habit of checking his notebook twice before speaking. He had grown up in Brackenridge Falls and still carried the discomfort of a young officer realizing the badge on his chest, had been sleeping through crimes committed in daylight. One by one, the old people came. Agnes Bell arrived wrapped in her lavender hat, clutching a folder of letters. Carl Donnelly came with his VFW cap and a stiff spine, carrying the roof contract he swore he never signed. Nora Jean brought a shoebox of notices and a flash drive from the diner's phone system. Each person looked ashamed at first, as if being tricked were a sin. Lydia spoke to them gently, never once letting them apologize for someone else's cruelty. Bishop moved among them without command. He sat beside Agnes until her shaking eased. He rested near Carl's boots while the old veteran explained the lien. He allowed Nora Jean to scratch the scarred edge of his ear, and she whispered that he was the only male in town with sense. The room almost laughed. Almost. Then the front bell rang. Everyone went still. Ruth moved toward the front, but Brennan stopped her with a look. Bishop was already standing. A plain white envelope had been slipped beneath the front door. No footsteps remained outside. Brennan picked it up with a napkin and carried it to the back table. It was addressed to Eleanor Cole in black block letters. Lydia said, "Do not touch the contents bare-handed." Brennan opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph. It showed Brennan leaving the North Dock warehouse in the early morning dark. Bishop was beside him. Pruitt's cruiser was visible in the background. On the back, written in neat ink, was a message. You lost your husband because he would not let go of that house. Do you want to lose your son too? For a long moment, no one breathed. The threat did not shout. It did not need to. It placed Harold's death Brennan's life and Eleanor's fear on the same thin page. Eleanor looked at the photograph. Her hand trembled once, only once. Then she reached for Bishop. The German shepherd came to her immediately. She placed her palm on his head. He stood tall beside her chair, eyes fixed on the door, body calm, ready. Eleanor lifted her chin. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it changed the room. "I ran out of my house carrying Harold's picture because I thought fear was the last thing I had left. It isn't." She looked at Brennan, then Lydia, then Ruth, then every old neighbor who had come with folders and shame. "If they want us afraid, they should have come before my son came home. They should have come before Bishop remembered every door they opened. They should have come before Harold left enough truth to wake the dead." Bishop gave one soft huff, almost like a grief. Brennan had seen courage in many forms. Men charging through gunfire, medics holding pressure on wounds, with hands slick from blood, pilots landing machines that should not have flown. But nothing he had seen looked braver than his mother in a borrowed grocery chair, wearing his father's sweater, refusing to be moved another inch. Lydia folded the photograph into an evidence sleeve. "Threatening a witness," she said. "That was careless." Brute nodded. "They're panicking." "No," Brennan said, watching Bishop. The dog had turned away from the envelope. He was staring at the back door, not warning this time, remembering. Then he walked to Eleanor's suitcase, still near the wall, and pulled Brennan's old handkerchief from the side pocket. He carried it to the door, waited until Brennan stood, then moved into the alley behind the store. "What now?" Ruth asked. Bishop did not go toward the street or the lake. He went to the small yard behind Ruth's building, where an old pine tree grew beside a rusted swing frame. Brennan remembered that tree. Harold had built a little wooden swing there when Brennan was 7, back when Ruth's husband was alive, and the two families spent summer evenings laughing between the store and the alley. Bishop stopped beneath the pine and began to dig. Snow flew. Brennan crouched beside him. Beneath the snow was frozen earth, then a layer of pine needles, then a flat stone placed too neatly to be natural. He lifted it. Underneath was a small metal box wrapped in plastic and oilcloth. Eleanor came to the back door, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Harold," she whispered. Brennan opened the box. Inside lay a bank safe deposit key and a folded note. The handwriting was weaker than the letter from the wood shop, but unmistakably Harold's. "Brennan, if they found the shop box, there is still one place I never told anyone about. Not even your mother. Forgive me for that. Some truths must sleep where love cannot accidentally betray them." Brennan closed his eyes. The final line sat alone at the bottom of the page. "Ask for box 117 at Brackenridge Community Bank." Bishop sat beside the hole, snow on his muzzle, watching Brennan as if he had done what Harold asked at last. The town outside was waiting. North Star's banner still hung across the road, promising a new future by the lake. But beneath Ruth Mayfield's old pine tree, Harold Cole had reached through death and placed one more key in his son's hand. Brackenridge Community Bank opened at 8, but by 7:30 that morning, its front lights were already burning. The old bank stood on the corner across from the courthouse, built of red brick and gray stone, with brass handles polished by generations of nervous hands. Snow lay thick on the roof. The American flag outside snapped in the wind, bright against the winter sky. To Brennan Cole, the building looked like something from his childhood that had survived, mostly because no one thought it worth destroying. Eleanor walked beside him with Bishop at her left knee. She had refused to stay behind. Her old coat was buttoned to the throat, Harold's blue sweater beneath it, and the framed photograph of her husband wrapped in a cloth bag under one arm. Her face was pale, the skin thin around her eyes, but her mouth held a quiet line Brennan was learning to recognize. His mother was afraid. She was simply no longer obeying fear. Sheriff Arlen Pruitt parked his cruiser by the curb. Lydia Kessler arrived behind him in a dark county sedan, leather satchel in hand, her short black hair brushed smooth despite the wind. Ruth Mayfield came too, wrapped in a green scarf, carrying a thermos of coffee as if history itself might need warming. Inside, they were met by Miriam Sloan, the bank manager. Miriam was 62, tall and straight-backed, with iron-gray hair cut in a neat bob and gold, rimmed glasses perched low on her nose. She wore a navy dress and a cardigan buttoned precisely, but her hands trembled slightly when she saw Eleanor. She had the careful manners of someone who had spent 4 decades guarding other people's money and secrets, and the tired eyes of someone who knew some secrets had grown too heavy. "Mrs. Cole," Miriam said gently, "I am so sorry for all of this." Eleanor only nodded. Lydia placed her identification on the counter. Box 117, Harold Cole. "We need access under Mrs. Cole's authority as surviving spouse and listed secondary holder." Miriam checked the records, her lips pressed together when the file appeared on the screen. "Yes," she said. "Harold added Eleanor years ago. He came in person to do it." Eleanor looked down. Brennan wondered if Harold had known, even then, that love sometimes had to make legal arrangements before grief arrived. They were led to the vault room, a small chamber of stone walls and metal drawers, where the air felt colder than the hallway. Miriam inserted the bank key. Brennan inserted the key Bishop had found beneath Ruth's pine tree. The drawer clicked open with a sound too small for what it carried. There was no money inside, no jewelry, no bonds, no secret fortune, only paper, bundles of copies tied with twine, property maps, old repair contracts, duplicate deeds, environmental reports with highlighted sections, letters written in Harold's firm hand, a list of names Brennan recognized now: Agnes Bell, Carl Donnelly, Nora Jean Barlow, Eleanor Cole, and more than a dozen others. Lydia's face sharpened as she read. "These are original parcel histories," she said. "Some of these don't match county digital records." Pruitt swore under his breath. Miriam looked stricken. "That means someone altered the electronic files." "Orson Rusk," Brennan said. Lydia lifted another page. "And here are the repair contracts North Star converted into secured debts. Same language, same witness initials, different homeowners." Ruth leaned in, eyes wet with fury. "They used the same trap and changed only the names." Brennan found an environmental report from 9 years earlier. It noted unusual chemical traces along the north shoreline and recommended follow-up testing after spring thaw. A second page showed no follow-up had ever been completed. Attached was a handwritten note from Harold. "They need the land before the—" At the bottom of the box was a letter addressed not to Brennan, not to Eleanor, but to Brackenridge Falls. Lydia asked Eleanor's permission before opening it. Eleanor nodded. Lydia read aloud. "A town does not die when a company buys land. It dies when neighbors hear knocking at midnight and pretend the wind made the sound. It dies when old people are made ashamed of being tricked. It dies when good men call fear procedure and good women carry grief alone, because they do not want to be troubled. If this letter is found, then I failed to stop them. But maybe I left enough for all of you to finish what one sick old carpenter could not." No one moved. Even Bishop was still, his amber eyes fixed on Lydia's face as if Harold's voice had returned in another body. Then Miriam's phone rang in the next room. She stepped out to answer. Not loud, tight. Bishop raised his head. Brennan turned. Eleanor's chair was empty. Her coat, the old one with the frayed cuffs, was still draped over the back of it. For one impossible second, Brennan stared at the chair as if the room itself had made a mistake. Ruth hurried to the hallway. Pruitt called Eleanor's name. Miriam appeared at the door, pale, one hand over the phone receiver. A woman called the front desk, Miriam said. She said Mrs. Cole was needed outside. She said there had been an accident at Ruth's store. Ruth's mouth fell open. No. Bishop crossed the vault room in a blur. He went to Eleanor's coat, buried his nose in it, then spun toward the rear exit. Brennan did not ask. He ran. The cold hit like a wall. Bishop was already pulling down the alley behind the bank. Nose low, body stretched with purpose. Brennan followed, Pruitt shouting into his radio behind him. Lydia calling for units and a warrant hold, Ruth praying and cursing in the same breath. Bishop did not lead toward Ruth's store. He led uphill toward the Cole house. By the time Brennan reached the pines, his lungs burned with cold. A black SUV was parked behind the old woodshed, hidden from the road. Tire tracks cut fresh wounds through the snow. The North Star sign on the fence swung wildly in the wind. His phone rang. "Unknown number," Brennan answered without slowing. A man's voice came through, smooth as polished ice. "Mr. Cole, you have been difficult to welcome home. Blaine Huxley." This was the first time Brennan heard him speak. The voice matched the photograph, controlled, elegant, empty of warmth. "Where is my mother?" "Inside her former residence." "Touch her and you won't make it to a courtroom," a soft laugh. "That is exactly the kind of sentence I hoped you might say while someone recorded it." Brennan stopped before the tree line. His face went still. Huxley continued. "You protected your country, Mr. Cole, yet here you are, unable to protect your mother from a pen. She will sign a statement confirming that she left voluntarily, that Harold was confused, and that any documents found in his possession are unreliable copies." Brennan looked through the trees toward the house. A dim light glowed in the living room. "You think that paper saves you?" "I think paper has done very well for me so far." The line went dead. Pruitt arrived, breathing hard, pistol drawn but pointed down. Lydia came behind him, controlled but pale. She had already called county units, but the nearest team was several minutes out. Brennan could have gone in alone. Every instinct in him knew entry points, angles, risks, likely positions. He could feel the old machine waking in his muscles. Then he looked at the house where his father had died, where his mother was being forced to sign away her own suffering, and he understood the trap. Huxley wanted a violent son, a dangerous veteran, a headline North Star could use. Brennan lowered his hand from the sidearm he no longer carried. "No," he said. Pruitt looked at him. "No what?" "No giving him what he wants." Lydia's eyes moved to the house. "Then we need witnesses." Ruth, who had caught up with them, pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I'll call everyone." Inside the Cole house, Eleanor sat at the dining table beneath a single lamp. Her wrists were tied loosely enough not to bruise, but tightly enough to insult her. Blaine Huxley stood across from her, tall and narrow in a dark cashmere coat. Silver, threaded hair combed back perfectly, clean-shaven face calm as a banker's smile. His eyes were gray and bright, not angry, merely inconvenienced. Beside him stood a younger North Star employee, the same blonde woman Brennan had glimpsed near the office bins. Her name tag read Claire. She looked terrified now, her pale face pinched, her white knit hat clutched in both hands. She would not meet Eleanor's eyes. Huxley slid the paper forward. Sign, Mrs. Cole. Eleanor looked at Harold's old chair. You know, she said softly, my husband built that chair after Brennan broke the first one, jumping off it in a bedsheet cape. Huxley sighed. Sentiment is not a legal argument. No, Eleanor said, but it lasts longer. Before Huxley could answer, Bishop barked outside. Once deep, sharp, unmistakable, Claire flinched. Huxley turned his head. Then came another sound. Cars, not one, not two, many. Headlights began to appear along the road below the hill. Ruth had called the town, and the town had come. Agnes Bell arrived in her nephew's pickup, clutching the false property papers in a folder against her chest. Carl Donnelly came in his old truck, VFW cap low cane in one hand, and Leonidas in the other. Nora Jean Barlow parked sideways in the snow, and stepped out with the diner's call recordings, sealed in a plastic bag. Pastor Lila came from the church with copies from the basement files. Mateo Cruz brought Elias Vane in the passenger seat of his cruiser. Elias looked frail when he stepped out. Thinner than Brennan expected, his narrow shoulders wrapped in a brown coat, white beard uneven, gray eyes sunken but awake. He leaned on a cane, but when he saw the Cole house, he straightened. Ruined men did not always stay ruined. Sometimes they only waited for one person to believe them. No one carried weapons. They carried flashlights, lanterns, folders, envelopes, photographs, and old fear finally turned outward. One by one, lights rose along the fence line. The road to the Cole house filled with citizens who had spent years lowering their voices. Now they stood in the snow, faces lit from below, looking less like a crowd than a congregation called to witness. Huxley saw them through the window for the first time. His face changed, not fear, calculation. Then Bishop growled. Brennan heard it before anyone else. The dog had moved around the side of the house, nose high. His growl was not aimed at the living room. It was aimed downward. The basement, Brennan said. Pruitt frowned. What? Bishop scratched at the cellar door near the back foundation, then barked violently. Brennan smelled it a second later, gasoline. Huxley had planned a second ending. If the paper failed, the house would burn. Old furnace, old wiring, old widow confused under pressure. Another tragedy explained by age and winter. Lydia's voice cut through the cold sheriff. Probable cause, get her out. Pruitt nodded once. Brennan did not wait for permission to save his mother. He and Bishop entered through the rear mudroom Harold had repaired years before. The dog moved first, low and fast, not attacking, searching. Brennan followed through smoke. Thin fumes, past the kitchen, past the table where his family once ate Sunday stew. Eleanor was no longer in the dining room. A muffled sound came from the small pantry off the back hall. Bishop reached it first. He pushed against the door, barking. Brennan kicked it open and found his mother seated on the floor, wrists bound, Harold's photograph pressed against her chest. Brennan, she breathed, I've got you. Bishop lowered his head and began working at the cloth around her wrists with careful teeth, pulling without tearing skin. Brennan cut the binding loose with a pocket blade. Behind them Huxley ran, not toward the road where the town stood, toward the lake path behind the house. Bishop exploded after him. "Bishop!" Brennan shouted. The dog did not attack. He drove. Huxley slipped down the snowy path toward the frozen dock. Expensive coat flaring open, polished shoes useless on ice. Bishop stayed behind and to the side, herding him away from the woods, away from darkness toward the growing blue and red lights of county vehicles arriving below. Huxley turned once, face twisted now, all polish gone. Call off that dog. Brennan stood at the top of the path with Eleanor behind him. He's just making sure you don't get lost. Pruitt reached Huxley first. The sheriff's hands shook as he drew the cuffs, but his voice did not. Blaine Huxley, you are under arrest for witness intimidation, coercion, attempted destruction of evidence, and whatever else Counselor Kessler can fit on paper before breakfast. Huxley looked at him with contempt. You think this saves you, Sheriff? Pruitt clicked the cuffs shut. No, but it might save them. By noon, Orson Rusk was arrested at the county records office while trying to delete archived property access logs. Claire, the young North Star employee, gave a statement. She had been told she was helping with legal transitions, then threatened when she began asking why elderly homeowners cried after signing. The environmental files were secured. Lydia froze North Star's local operations pending investigation. Every forced contract would be reviewed. But the moment Brennan remembered most came before the officers finished photographing the house. It was Eleanor stepping back onto the porch. The snow had stopped. Morning light touched the roof, the fence, the swingless porch, the old steps Harold had built. Eleanor carried Harold's portrait inside and set it gently on his wooden chair. Bishop walked to a pair of Harold's old work boots still near the wall, lowered himself beside them, and rested his muzzle on the floor. At last the dog slept. Brennan stood in the doorway, watching him. Eleanor came beside her son and placed a thin hand on his arm. He waited for you, she said. Brennan's throat tightened. He did more than wait. Later, Lydia handed Brennan one final page from the bank box. It had slipped between two property maps. Harold's writing was faint but clear. If Bishop is still beside your mother when you read this, then this family never truly lost its guard. Son, do not spend your life as a man who came too late. Live as a man who came home. Brennan knelt beside Bishop and wrapped both arms around the dog's neck. You did better than me, old friend, he whispered. Eleanor lowered herself beside them, slow but determined. No, she said, her hand resting on Bishop's back and Brennan's shoulder together. You left him with us. Then you came back to finish what love began. Spring came slowly to Brackenridge Falls. The lake thawed in silver pieces. The state inspectors returned. North Star's banners came down. Agnes Bell kept her cabin. Carl Donnelly planted new flowers by the maple where his wife's ashes rested. Nora Jean reopened the diner with a sign in the window that read, "Small print costs extra." Elias Vane's license review was reopened. Sheriff Pruitt stayed in office only long enough to testify, then stepped down without ceremony. Orson Rusk's name came off the county door. Lydia Kessler built the case with the patience of a stone mason, and Brennan stayed. He helped turn the old church basement into a weekly legal clinic for seniors and veterans. Ruth made coffee. Pastor Lila organized rides. Mateo Cruz took reports seriously. Bishop became a familiar sight at every meeting, lying beside folding chairs, accepting biscuits from no one unless Eleanor approved. No one in Brackenridge Falls called Brennan a hero. That suited him. Heroes belonged on posters, and Brennan had learned that real rescue often looked smaller. A son answering a door, a mother refusing to sign, a dog remembering a promise, a town lifting flashlights into the dark and discovering that one small light could be ignored, but 100 could make even the most polished liar blink. On the first warm evening of spring, Brennan repaired the front step of the Cole house with Harold's old tools. Eleanor sat on the porch with a blanket over her knees. Bishop lay between them, gray showing lightly around his muzzle now, eyes half closed. The house smelled of sawdust again. Brennan drove the final nail carefully. not in anger, but in patience. Somewhere beyond the pines, the lake moved under the setting sun, and for the first time in 5 years, Brennan Cole heard home not as a memory calling from behind him, but as a living thing breathing beside him. Sometimes the greatest battles are not fought on distant fields or in places the world will ever know. Sometimes they happen quietly at home. They happen when an old mother stands in the snow with nowhere to go. They happen when a father uses his final strength to protect the people he loves. They happen when a loyal dog keeps watch long after everyone else has walked away. And they happen when one person finally chooses courage over silence. Brennan thought he had come home too late. He believed he had missed the chance to say goodbye, to protect his father, to stand beside his mother when she needed him most. But God has a way of working through broken roads, delayed returns, and hearts that still carry love even after years of silence. Maybe the miracle in this story was not a lightning strike from heaven. Maybe it was Bishop remembering his promise. Maybe it was Harold leaving truth behind piece by piece. Maybe it was Eleanor finding the strength to stop running. Maybe it was a whole town realizing that one small light may be easy to ignore, but many lights together can push back the darkest night. In our daily lives, we may pass people like Eleanor without knowing it. An elderly neighbor who is afraid to ask, a widow confused by paperwork, a veteran carrying guilt no one can see, a family quietly losing their home, their dignity, or their hope. And maybe God places us near them for a reason, not always to perform a grand miracle, but to knock on a door, to listen, to believe someone's pain, to stand because kindness can be a mission, truth can be a rescue, and love, when it refuses to give up, can become the hand of God in someone's life. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that it is never too late for justice, healing, and homecoming. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. If you believe God still works through ordinary people, loyal animals, and unexpected moments of courage, write Amen in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories of faith, loyalty, courage, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and help this message reach more hearts. May God bless you, protect your family, watch over your home, and give you the courage to be a light for someone who feels forgotten.